Well, this morning on the beach, we had a wonderful Oregon day. I say that. It was perfect for an Oregon celebration. Lots of rain coming down. And the things I talked to the distinguished gathering there really harken back to my life as a child of my father. And we were looking at the beach bill. The beach bill symbolizes so much of what he believes in. He believes in preserving the natural resources of the state for the enjoyment of all. They are not things to be appropriated to one individual, they're to be shared. They're to be protected. They're to be treasured and preserved. So with that kind of philosophy, I wanted to be able to talk about something in a way that both captured the significance of what he did, the happiness of what we're doing, and the perpetuity of what has been accomplished. So I started out having to acknowledge that you all knew the history probably better than I did, but that I knew the family history. So I talked about that. And I tried to illuminate a little bit about my father because of the accomplishments of his two terms, people kind of have this idea that, wow, Tom McCall walked in the room and everything changed. No, it was politics, and everybody had a different opinion. And actually, as a Republican, he had lots of allies in the Democratic Party and some in the Republican Party, and so it was cross-cutting. It wasn't monolithic politics, it was issue-based politics, and it changed with the issue. And so I wanted to capture that, and so I said, well, how to do that? Because I wasn't in the legislature. Well, I was at home, and so the only thing I could relate and reveal would be, well, what's it like? I wasn't there every day then because I was in 1967. I was already getting ready to go, but I was home often enough. We often spent the weekends together down at Lincoln City at Rhodes End, and so it was almost like being at home. And so I thought I would reflect on that. And then I had the years with my father before he was governor, so I knew his patterns, all right? And I didn't go into all this because I was trying to be very brief, but the pattern was my dad worked and worked and worked. And I went to sleep at night as a young man hearing tip, 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 tip as he's going with two fingers, and we all fell asleep to typewriters. And he would work on and on into the night. And he had his typewriter and he had his yellow pads, and he had his writing, which nobody could read. It's a secret script. But anyway, he would go through these drafts. And when you see him testify, speak, he often had a script that he was looking at. He was very good at it, so he didn't have to read it. But he read very well, let's put it that way. He did read, but he read very well. And he had that clipped accent that was just, thank you for playing that today. I listened to my father's voice and I said, no one has that way to convey information. Just to package the information in is amazing. But so people would think that, this blessed man got all these things done. It must have been, that was the good old days. Well, it wasn't really the good old days. It was history in the making, and history is a give and take of different forces. And so what I could show is what it was like at home. And what it was like at home is we were kind of the practice audience. And he'd get things ready. Because if he was involved in it, we'd be talking about it. We'd come home at dinner, we'd be sitting down, we'd be talking about the events of the day. And by the way, my dad, and I didn't talk about this, but my dad didn't have any exalted pedestal in the family. He was getting cut down. We were his harshest critics. No extra credit for being governor. Okay, so we would give it back to him, and we would also tell him when we thought he had it right. And my mother was the best at this. She was really a very important part of his thinking process, including telling him when to put the decelerator on, put the brake on. So she was good counsel. So during this period, which started before his inaugural address, and I can't say when it started, but I know it was before that because he'd been fussing about this thing about the beach for quite a while. And I actually had to go back and read Tom McCall Maverick, and just to kind of refresh my memory of the sequence. And so I looked at that sequence, and it started out in his book in January 9th, 1967. I said, no, it was not then. It was before that. And so then I remembered that he was always talking about this English common law and the rod, and so anyway, what it all came down to was he was formulating his approach. He was gathering this information, he was formulating, he was kind of testing it out. And what he came to the conclusion was Oz West had done this great thing where we had the highway, but this legal issue had been raised in the courts in 1966. And the legal issue was a dry sand to Publix. And he felt, he felt all along it wasn't that he had to read English common law. He was just looking for a way to support his belief, and he found it. And so he said, look at this, the Crown owns the sands. And so the Crown became the state. And so he was back Magna Carta type days, and he brought that forward. And then he talked to the oceanographers at Oregon State. And this is another thing. He consulted and consulted and consulted. He looked like a man who was making his own opinions, but he was really taking other people's advice quite often, like the odd even gas. The odd even gas days during the Arab oil embargo. That came from somebody else, but he's the one that then put the idea on the table. So I was just showing them that it wasn't magic. It wasn't just a big helicopter ride and Eureka, we've got it. It was something that took a long time. And while he's talking to us, he's talking to his allies, and building strength and shaping ideas. Was a great consensus builder. And he knew where he wasn't going to get the consensus, and he had strategies to deal with that. He wasn't a Machiavellian person, but you have to know who you confide in and who you don't. So you get your kind of blocking tactics, and you build your consensus tactics. And he was very good at that. He was a person of all people, whether it was legislatures or... And I didn't mention this at the beach because I was trying to be brief, and you probably wish I'd be brief right now, but wherever we went in Oregon, you could, once he got out of the car, people were coming up to him. I've been around a lot of politicians. I used to be a legislative attorney when I was in uniform for the Navy for a few years. And quite often politicians really aren't that comfortable with people. They like to kind of have their distance a little bit. My dad would wade in. He would just light up. If he was tired or something, bang, all the lights, all the energy, they'd all be engaging. Mother would be saying, "Come on, Tom, it's time to move on." So he just had a need for people, a relationship for people, and people had the same for him. It was a wonderful experience. I was too young and too close to appreciate the specialness of it. He was just my dad. This is how Dad is, But now I realize that if we all had, if we had more characters like that who cared so much, not so much about themselves, but about things and about people, and valued and trusted the dignity of people, then I think we'd be a better place.